I'm Megan, 31 female. My husband David and I live in a modest apartment in the city, saving every penny we could for our dream of owning a home with a small yard. I work as an architectural drafter, designing blueprints for other people's dreams, while he works as a software engineer, building the digital architecture of the modern world. For years, our shared goal was a little slice of suburbia to call our own, a place where we could finally plant roots. But we soon learned that accepting a gift from family could turn that dream into a gilded cage, designed to trap us under their control forever. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The search for our first home was an exhausting marathon of hope and disappointment. For over a year, David and I spent every weekend touring open houses, our optimism slowly eroding with each bidding war we lost. The market was brutal, and the kind of charming, two-story colonial we envisioned, the one with the big oak tree in the front yard, seemed to drift further out of reach with every rejected offer. Our savings were substantial, a testament to years of disciplined budgeting, but in a sea of cash offers and waived inspections, we were barely treading water. My in-laws, Robert and Susan, were constant observers of our struggle. Robert, a retired CPA, treated our financial situation like one of his old accounts, always probing for numbers and offering unsolicited advice. "You see, Megan," he'd say during our obligatory Sunday dinners, swirling his wine, "the key is leverage. You're not thinking about leverage." Susan would just nod along, patting David's hand and sighing about how she just wanted her son to be settled. David, ever the peacekeeper, would smile weakly and change the subject. He loved his parents, but even he found their constant oversight suffocating. One Sunday, after we'd lost yet another house to an offer $50,000 over asking, Robert cleared his throat with an air of finality. "This is ridiculous," he announced. "Your mother and I have discussed it. We want to help." David and I exchanged a nervous glance. Help from Robert and Susan always came with invisible strings. When they helped pay for our wedding, it meant Susan got final say on the floral arrangements, and Robert invited a dozen of his business associates we'd never met. "What do you mean, Dad?" David asked cautiously. "We're going to give you the rest of your down payment," Robert said, beaming as if he'd just solved world hunger. $100,000, a gift, to get you into a proper home, finally. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. $100,000. It was a life-changing amount of money. It was the key that would unlock the door to the very houses we'd been locked out of. My mind raced with possibilities, the images of dream kitchens and spacious backyards flooding my thoughts, but a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. A gift of that magnitude from Robert felt less like generosity and more like a strategic acquisition. "Dad, we can't accept that," David stammered, his face pale. "That's too much." "Nonsense," Susan chimed in, her voice bright. "It's our pleasure. We want to see our grandchildren have a yard to play in one day." The mention of future grandchildren was a classic Susan move, a little emotional blackmail wrapped in a grandmotherly smile. I looked at David, trying to communicate my apprehension with my eyes. He looked torn, caught between his ingrained desire to please his parents and the glaring red flags waving in front of us. As an architectural drafter, I lived by the rule that a solid structure requires a flawless foundation. This foundation felt compromised from the start. Over the next week, Robert was relentless. He called David daily, sending him listings that were now within our reach thanks to his generous gift. He spoke of it as a done deal, a simple transfer of funds to ensure his son's happiness. David, worn down by the house-hunting stress and his father's persistence, started to come around. "Maybe it's not so bad, Meg," he said one evening as we scrolled through listings on the laptop. "He's my dad, he just wants to help, and look at this place, it's perfect. We could actually afford it with their help." The house was perfect. A beautiful blue colonial with white trim, a screened-in porch, and yes, a giant oak tree in the front yard. It was everything we'd ever wanted. The allure of it was powerful, a siren song calling us to ignore the warnings. Against my better judgment, I found myself being swayed. My desire for the house began to outweigh my distrust of the man offering it. So I agreed, cautiously. Okay, I told David, but we need to be clear with them. This is a gift, no strings attached. We need to have a proper gift letter for the mortgage lender, all above board. David promised he would make it crystal clear. He had a long talk with Robert, who apparently chuckled and said, "Of course, son, it's a gift. What else would it be?" The process moved incredibly fast after that. Robert transferred the money into our account. We got the gift letter, a simple, one-page document declaring the funds were a gift with no expectation of repayment. We put an offer on the Blue Colonial, and to our astonishment, it was accepted. The relief was intoxicating. We were finally going to be homeowners. The closing day was a blur of excitement and paperwork. David's parents came with us to the lawyer's office, beaming with pride. Robert watched over the signing like a hawk, occasionally pointing a finger and asking the lawyer to clarify a piece of jargon, projecting an image of a protective father. I was so caught up in the moment, in the joy of seeing our dream come true, that I let my guard down completely. I signed document after document, my hand cramping, my mind filled with thoughts of paint colors and furniture placement. The lawyer slid a final stack of papers toward us. "This is the deed," he said. "Congratulations, you're officially homeowners." David's parents clapped, and Susan even shed a tear. Robert shook David's hand firmly and then, to my surprise, shook mine. "Welcome to the family, Megan," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Properly now." I didn't understand his odd phrasing at the time. I dismissed it as Robert being his usual awkward self. We walked out of that office holding the keys to our new life, feeling nothing but pure, unadulterated joy. We were indebted to them, of course, but it was an emotional debt of gratitude, not a financial one, or so I thought. We had the gift letter. We had the keys. The foundation, it seemed, was secure. We had no idea that we had just signed our way into a trap, and that the blueprints for our beautiful new life had a hidden, malicious design flaw that threatened to bring the whole structure crashing down around us. The first few months in the new house were blissful. We spent our weekends painting walls, assembling furniture, and planning our garden. It felt like we were finally living the life we had worked so hard for. David was happier than I'd seen him in years, and the stress of the house hunt melted away, replaced by the simple joys of homeownership. The $100,000 gift faded into the background, becoming just another part of our origin story as homeowners. However, Robert and Susan's presence became a fixture in our new life. They would drop by unannounced, bringing housewarming gifts we didn't need and offering opinions we didn't ask for. Susan wanted to help me choose curtains for the living room, insisting on a heavy damask that wasn't my style. Robert walked the property line, pointing out where David should plant a row of hedges for maximum privacy and curb appeal, and critiqued the brand of lawnmower David bought. "You have to maintain the property, son," Robert would say, his tone implying that David was already failing. "An asset like this requires constant upkeep. It's an investment." It was annoying, but we brushed it off as them being overly excited. They had, after all, made this possible. We felt obligated to tolerate their intrusions. David, in particular, was adamant that we show our gratitude. "They're just proud, Meg," he'd say after a particularly intrusive visit. "Let them have this." The tipping point came about 6 months after we moved in. Robert called David and requested a family finance meeting at their house the following Sunday. He was using his old CPA tone, the one that meant business. David and I were confused. Our finances were our own. We were paying our mortgage on time, managing our bills, and had even started replenishing our savings. There was nothing to discuss. "What's this about?" I asked David the night before the meeting. "I have no idea," he said, looking just as bewildered as I felt. Dad was being cryptic, said it was time to formalize the arrangement. "What arrangement?" My voice was sharp, the old knot of unease returning with a vengeance. "The arrangement was a gift. We have the letter. The deal is done. I know. It's probably nothing, David said, trying to reassure both of us. You know how he is. He probably just wants to go over our budget and give us a lecture on retirement planning. I wasn't so sure. We walked into his parents' house that Sunday with a sense of foreboding. Robert and Susan were waiting for us in the formal living room, a room reserved for serious occasions. A folder lay on the coffee table in front of Robert. Susan was fussing with the tea set, her movements jerky and nervous. David, Megan, sit down, Robert said, gesturing to the sofa opposite him. He didn't wait for us to get comfortable. He picked up the folder and slid a document across the table. I think it's time we reviewed the terms of our agreement. I looked at the paper. It was a professionally drafted loan agreement. My heart started to pound in my chest. At the top, in clear, bold letters, it read, "Promissory note." It detailed a loan of $100,000 from Robert and Susan to me and David with a 5% interest rate, amortized over 15 years. I couldn't speak. I looked at David, whose face had gone completely white. He stared at the paper as if it were written in a foreign language. "What is this?" David finally choked out, his voice barely a whisper. "Dad, what is this? You said it was a gift." Robert leaned back, steepling his fingers. He looked calm, collected, and completely in control. "It was an initial gift to secure the property, son, but an investment of that size needs to be protected. This is just formalizing the terms of repayment. The interest rate is very reasonable, far below market rate. I'm doing you a favor." "A favor?" I found my voice, and it was shaking with rage. "You call this a favor? You lied to us. We have a gift letter, Robert, a legally binding document that we submitted to our mortgage lender." Robert smirked. It was a small, chilling expression that made my blood run cold. Ah, the gift letter, a necessary formality, wasn't it, to satisfy the bank? But we are family, and in this family we have our own arrangements. This document, he tapped the promissory note, is our arrangement. My mind was reeling. He was admitting to mortgage fraud. He had knowingly submitted a false document to the bank, and he was now using that to blackmail us. "I'm not signing this," I said, my voice low and firm. "We're not signing this," David echoed, finding a sliver of backbone. "This is insane." Susan, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. "David, honey, your father knows best. It's just to protect the family's money. What if you two, didn't work out? What if you sold the house? Your father just wants to make sure the money stays in the family." The implication was disgusting. He was planning for our divorce. He was ensuring that if I ever left David, I wouldn't get a cent of his money. "That's not going to happen," David said, his voice rising. "And even if it did, that's our business." This was when Robert played his trump card. He reached back into the folder and pulled out a second document, sliding it across the table. "I was hoping you'd be reasonable," he said, his voice smooth as ice. "But I was prepared for you to be emotional. Perhaps you should look at this." It was a copy of the deed to our house, our dream house. I scanned the page, my eyes searching for what I was supposed to see, and then I found it. Under the heading Grantees, there were 4 names listed, not 2. Megan, my last name, David, his last name. And right below ours. Robert, his last name, Susan, his last name. My stomach dropped, the room tilted. I felt like I couldn't breathe. His name, their names were on the deed to our house. They were co-owners. In the blur of the closing, in the rush of signing dozens of pages, we had missed it. The lawyer, who was likely a friend of Robert's, had never pointed it out. We had signed it. We had naively signed away a portion of our own home. Robert watched my reaction, his eyes glinting with triumph. "As you can see," he said calmly, "we are partners in this venture. You live in the house, you pay the mortgage and the bills, and you handle the upkeep. We provide the capital and hold a controlling interest. That is our new arrangement. And as your partners, we have a say in what happens with our shared asset. So you will sign the loan agreement. It's no longer a request." The ride home was dead silent. The promissory note, and the copy of the deed sat on the console between us, feeling more like a bomb than a set of documents. I stared out the window, the familiar neighborhood streets looking alien and hostile. The beautiful houses with their manicured lawns suddenly seemed like facades, hiding secrets just like ours now did. Every brick in our blue colonial felt like a part of a prison wall being built around me. David drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I could feel the waves of shame and anger rolling off him. He had been played by his own father, and he had brought me down with him. I was furious, but I was also terrified. Robert held all the cards. His name was on our deed. We had unknowingly entered into a partnership with a predator. When we finally pulled into our driveway, neither of us moved to get out of the car. The sight of our home, the one we had been so proud of, made me feel physically sick. "I can't believe I didn't see it," David finally said, his voice thick with self-loathing. "I trusted him. He's my dad." "He's not just your dad, David. He's a CPA. He knows exactly what he's doing," I replied, my voice flat. "He planned this from the moment he offered us the money. The unannounced visits, the constant criticism about upkeep. He was acting like a landlord because in his mind, that's what he is." "What did the lawyer say at the closing?" David asked, desperately trying to retrace our steps. "Did he explain the deed?" I tried to remember. The moment was a blur of joy and paperwork. "I don't know, I don't think so. He just slid it over and said, 'Here's the deed, sign here.' We were so excited, we just signed." I thought back to the man, older, with a friendly face, someone Robert had recommended. Of course, it was all a setup. "We have to fight this, Megan," David said, turning to me, his eyes pleading. "We can't just roll over and pay him. We can't live like this." "How?" I asked, the hopelessness of the situation washing over me. "Our signatures are on that deed. In the eyes of the law, we agreed to this. And he's holding that fraudulent gift letter over our heads. If we make a fuss, he could imply we were co-conspirators in defrauding the bank. He's boxed us in." We went inside, and the house felt different. Colder. Every room was a reminder of Robert's ownership. The walls I had so carefully painted, the floors we had refinished, it didn't feel like it was mine anymore. I went into my home office, where I kept all our important documents in a filing cabinet. I needed to see the original. My hands trembled as I pulled out the thick folder from the closing. I sifted through the mountain of paperwork, the mortgage agreement, the inspection reports, the title insurance. And there it was, the original deed. I spread it out on my desk, the paper cool and official beneath my fingertips. The 4 names stared back at me, a permanent testament to our naivety. Robert's scheme was brilliant in its cruelty. He had used our dream as bait and our trust as the mechanism for the trap. For the next few days, a heavy cloud hung over our home. David tried calling his father, attempting to reason with him. The conversations were disastrous. Robert was immovable, treating David's pleas as petulant whining. "You're being emotional, son," Robert said, his voice calm and patronizing over the speakerphone. "This is a business decision. You and Megan need to grow up and understand your responsibilities." "This isn't a business, it's our home, our life," David yelled, his face flushed with anger. "You tricked us." "I secured my investment," Robert countered coolly. "And I'm protecting you from yourselves. Now, I expect that promissory note to be signed and returned to me by the end of the week. The first payment is due on the 1st of next month." After that call, David deflated. He retreated into himself, the weight of his father's betrayal crushing him. He felt responsible, and his guilt was creating a chasm between us. I knew that if we let Robert win, this would destroy not only our finances but our marriage as well. Robert wasn't just trying to control our house, he was trying to control our entire lives, and by extension, our relationship. He wanted to be the patriarch, the puppet master pulling the strings, and he was succeeding. I spent hours poring over every single document from the closing. As an architectural drafter, my job is to see the details others miss, to understand how every line and measurement fits into the larger structure. I started applying that same methodical approach to our legal predicament. I read about property law, co-ownership agreements, and mortgage fraud. The more I read, the more I understood the depth of the hole we were in. The type of ownership on the deed was joint tenants with right of survivorship. This meant that if one owner passed away, their share would automatically go to the other surviving owners. It was a common arrangement for married couples, but a bizarre and predatory one for this situation. It meant we couldn't even will our share of the house to anyone else. It would always revert to the other names on the deed. It was designed to keep the asset, our home, under his control forever. But it was in the fine print of the title insurance policy that I found the first glimmer of something strange. It was a standard policy, but there was an addendum, a rider I didn't remember signing, though my signature was clearly there. It was a specific exclusion related to claims arising from intra-family transfers not disclosed to the insurer. I didn't understand the full legal implications, but it felt significant. It was a thread, and I knew I had to pull on it. The anger that had been simmering inside me began to solidify into something else: resolve. Robert thought he had designed the perfect trap. He saw me as just his son's emotional wife, an accessory to his grand plan. He didn't know that I designed structures for a living. I understand foundations, stress points, and load-bearing walls. He had built a faulty structure, and I was going to find its weakest point and bring the whole thing down. He thought. He was in control, but he had underestimated me. And that was going to be his biggest mistake. The first person I thought of was my old college friend, Jessica. We had been roommates, and while I went on to study architecture, she had pursued a law degree. She was now a sharp, no-nonsense corporate lawyer in the city. Real estate wasn't her specialty, but I knew she was brilliant, and more importantly, I knew I could trust her completely. I called her that night, my voice wavering as I explained the situation. "Jess, I'm in serious trouble. I think my father-in-law scammed us into co-owning our house with him." "What?" Jessica's voice on the other end of the line sharpened with focus. "Megan, slow down, start from the beginning, tell me everything." I spent the next hour walking her through the whole sordid affair. The gift, the closing, the surprise loan agreement, and the gut-wrenching discovery of the 4 names on the deed. I told her about Robert's smug demeanor and the way he was using our own home to blackmail us. When I finished, there was a long pause on the line. "He did what?" Jessica finally said, a note of disbelief in her voice. "Megan, this is unbelievably audacious. He didn't just put his name on the deed, he committed blatant mortgage fraud by signing that gift letter." "I know," I said, feeling a surge of validation. "But I'm terrified. Our signatures are on everything, we look complicit. And David, he's falling apart. He's so ashamed, he can barely even talk about it." "Okay, don't panic," Jessica said, her tone shifting into professional mode. "First, do not sign that promissory note. Do you hear me? Don't sign anything else he gives you. Second, gather every single piece of paper related to this transaction. The gift letter, the deed, the mortgage agreement, all the closing documents, even emails or texts from him about the money. I want to see everything." The next day, I took the day off work and drove into the city to meet Jessica at her office. Her firm was one of those glass and steel towers that projected power and expense. Sitting in her sleek, minimalist office, I laid out the contents of my folder on her large mahogany desk. It felt like I was presenting evidence at a trial. Jessica put on her glasses and began to examine the documents, her focus absolute. She read each page carefully, occasionally letting out a low whistle or a frustrated sigh. She spent a long time on the deed and the gift letter, placing them side by side. "This is the smoking gun," she said, tapping the gift letter. "This document, which he signed, explicitly states the funds are a gift with no expectation of repayment. His new promissory note is a direct contradiction of a legal document he already executed. He's trying to have it both ways." "But what about our signatures on the deed?" I asked, my voice small. "Doesn't that mean we agreed to the co-ownership?" "It does, and that's the stickiest part of this," she admitted, leaning back in her chair. "He will argue that you knew what you were signing. However, the context here is everything. He presented the money as a gift. He had you sign a document to that effect. He then, at a closing with a lawyer he likely has a relationship with, slipped in a deed that changed the nature of the entire transaction without, I assume, any verbal explanation of this material change. None, I confirmed. We were just told to sign. That could be considered fraudulent inducement, she mused, thinking aloud. He induced you to enter the contract for the house under false pretenses. It's a tough argument to win, but it's an argument. She then picked up the title insurance policy, looking at the rider I had flagged. Her eyes narrowed. This is interesting, she said. This exclusion rider, it's unusual. It feels like someone was trying to preemptively cover their tracks. It suggests that the title company, and by extension the lawyer who handled the closing, might have been aware that this was a non-standard, high-risk transaction between family members. Jessica tapped her pen on her desk for a moment, her legal mind whirring. Okay, here's what I think, she said finally. We have two potential avenues of leverage. First is the mortgage fraud. Robert, your father-in-law, the CPA, knowingly provided a false document to a federally insured lender. That's a federal offense. We have to be careful with this one, because as you said, he could try to paint you as co-conspirators. But the threat of reporting him to the authorities is a very powerful card to hold. My heart hammered in my chest. A federal offense. This was even more serious than I had imagined. What's the second one? I asked. The second, and perhaps cleaner, path is a civil action, she explained. We could sue him to have his name removed from the deed on the grounds of fraud and unjust enrichment. We would argue that he manipulated you and that the co-ownership agreement is invalid because it was based on a lie. It would be an ugly, expensive, and public lawsuit. The thought of suing my husband's parents made me queasy. The fallout would be catastrophic for our family. David would be devastated. Jessica saw the hesitation on my face. I know, she said gently. It's a nuclear option, but right now we're not filing anything. We're gathering our ammunition. We need to build a case so strong that he has no choice but to back down without a fight. She gave me a list of instructions. First, I was to go to the bank and request their entire file on our mortgage application, including any and all correspondence with the closing attorney. Second, I was to find out who paid the closing attorney. Was it rolled into our closing costs, or did Robert pay him directly? Third, and most importantly, I was to stop all communication with Robert. All correspondence had to go through her. He wants you to feel isolated and powerless, Jessica said, her eyes firm. He's counting on you being too scared and ashamed to do anything. We are not going to let that happen. You are the client. I work for you. And right now, our primary objective is to get your house back. Leaving Jessica's office, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders for the first time in weeks. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I had an advocate. I had a plan. Hope, which had felt like a distant memory, began to flicker back to life. Robert had built his trap with legal documents and financial manipulation, but I was about to counter with a legal arsenal of my own. The quiet, agreeable daughter-in-law he thought he could control was about to become his worst nightmare. He had started a war based on fine print and deception, but I was going to end it with the full force of the law. Armed with Jessica's strategy, I transformed from a victim into an investigator. My work as an architectural drafter had trained me to be meticulous and patient, skills I now applied to dismantling my father-in-law's scheme. While David was at work, I spent my days on the phone, sending emails, and digging through paperwork with a fervor I hadn't felt before. My first call was to our mortgage lender. Citing a need for our records for tax purposes, I requested our complete application file. It took a few days and some persistence, but eventually, a thick envelope arrived. Inside, I found exactly what Jessica suspected: a copy of the gift letter, front and center, along with an internal note from the loan officer flagging it as a key component of our financial eligibility. The bank had relied heavily on that gift to approve our loan. This was my proof. Next, I tackled the closing attorney. I called his office, pretending to be confused about a fee on our closing statement. After a bit of polite but firm questioning, a paralegal confirmed that their legal fees had been paid directly by Robert via a personal check, separate from the closing costs. This was crucial. It demonstrated a direct financial relationship between Robert and the lawyer who was supposed to be representing the transaction impartially. It reeked of collusion. I documented everything, creating a new folder labeled Payback. Every phone call was logged with the date, time, and summary of the conversation. Every document was scanned and saved to a secure cloud drive. I was building a fortress of evidence. While I focused on the legal front, I also had to manage the situation at home. David was still in a dark place, torn between his loyalty to me and the deep, painful betrayal by his father. He was avoiding Robert's calls, which were becoming more frequent and demanding. One evening, I sat him down at our kitchen table, the table in the house that was at the center of our nightmare. "David, we need to talk," I said softly. "I've been working with Jessica, and we have a plan." I walked him through everything I had discovered, the bank's reliance on the gift letter, the payment to the lawyer. I explained the legal leverage we now had. Robert committed a crime, David, a serious one, and he involved a lawyer to do it. We have him. David listened, his expression shifting from despair to a flicker of something I hadn't seen in weeks: anger, real anger. "He paid the lawyer," he said, his voice low. "So the whole thing was a performance. That friendly old guy was working for my dad the whole time." "It seems that way," I confirmed. "But this gives us power. We don't have to sue him. Jessica thinks we can force him to the table and make him undo this quietly." This was the turning point for David. The concrete evidence of a conspiracy, not just a cruel trick, seemed to sever the final thread of filial obligation that had been paralyzing him. He finally saw his father not as a misguided parent, but as the architect of a calculated attack on our marriage and our future. "What do we do?" he asked, his eyes meeting mine, clear and resolute for the first time since the revelation. "We do. Raw up our own agreement," I said, feeling a surge of strength now that we were a united front. "This is my field, after all. I design things. I'm going to design our exit strategy from this mess." I spent the next 2 days creating our counteroffer. It wasn't a legal document, Jessica would handle that, but a clear, concise list of our non-negotiable terms. I laid it out like a project brief. Project: reclaim sole ownership of our address. Parties: Megan and David, grantors of demands; Robert and Susan, respondents. Terms: deed correction. Robert and Susan will sign a quitclaim deed, relinquishing all rights and interest in the property, transferring ownership solely to Megan and David. This is to be prepared by a neutral third-party attorney of our choosing, at Robert's expense. Debt forgiveness. The initial $100,000 will be officially and irrevocably recognized as a gift, as per the original gift letter. All copies of the subsequent promissory note are to be destroyed. No repayment will ever be made. Legal fees. Robert will reimburse us for all legal fees incurred in consulting with our own counsel to resolve this matter. A receipt from Jessica's firm will be provided. Confidentiality and no contact. Upon completion of the above terms, all parties agree to a period of no contact for a minimum of 1 year to allow for emotional and financial recovery. Underneath the terms, I attached a simple 1-page summary of our evidence, bullet-pointing the key facts: the signed gift letter submitted to the bank, the proof of payment to the closing attorney, and a reference to the federal statutes concerning mortgage fraud. It was clean, professional, and utterly damning. I presented the plan to Jessica. She reviewed my document, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Megan, this is perfect," she said. "It's clear, direct, and shows you won't be bullied. It lays out the consequences without making explicit threats. It tells him, I know what you did, and this is your one and only chance to fix it cleanly." Jessica then drafted a formal legal letter incorporating my points. It was a masterpiece of professional intimidation. It detailed Robert's fraudulent actions and outlined our terms as the only viable path to an amicable resolution. subtly hinting at the severe legal and financial repercussions of noncompliance, including potential reports to the IRS and federal banking authorities. The plan was set. The letter was ready. All that was left was the confrontation. David and I decided it had to be in person. Robert was a bully who thrived on phone calls and distance. We needed to face him on our own terms, in a neutral setting. David called his father. His voice was steady, betraying no emotion. "Dad," he said, "Megan and I need to meet with you and Mom to discuss the paperwork. We'll be at the Clove restaurant for dinner on Saturday at 7 p.m. We expect you to be there." He didn't wait for a reply, he just hung up. The ball was in Robert's court. For weeks, he had been the one making demands and setting deadlines. We had just seized control of the narrative. We were no longer reacting to his scheme. We were executing our own perfectly designed counterplan. He thought he was the master architect, but he was about to find out what it felt like when his own creation was systematically dismantled right in front of him. The Clove was a quiet, upscale restaurant we chose specifically for its atmosphere. It was public enough to prevent a shouting match, but private enough for a serious conversation. As David and I waited at the table, I placed a single, sealed envelope next to my silverware. Inside was the letter from Jessica. It was our only weapon, and I hoped it would be enough. My heart was pounding, but I focused on keeping my breathing even. David sat beside me, his posture straight, his jaw set. We were a team. We had rehearsed this moment, deciding that I would do most of the talking. David's role was to be a silent, unshakable wall of support, showing his father that his influence over his son was broken. Robert and Susan arrived exactly at 7. Robert strode in with his usual air of self-importance, but I noticed a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Our summons had clearly thrown him off. Susan looked nervous, clutching her purse like a shield. "David, Megan," Robert said, sitting down without a greeting. "I'm glad you've come to your senses. I have a new copy of the promissory note for you to sign." He started to reach into his jacket pocket, but I held up my hand. "We won't be signing anything, Robert," I said, my voice calm and steady. "We're not here to negotiate. We're here to inform you of the terms under which this situation will be resolved." Robert's face hardened. He looked from me to David, clearly expecting his son to intervene. David just stared back at him, his expression unreadable. "And what terms would those be?" Robert asked with a condescending chuckle. "You're in. No position to be making demands." I slid the envelope across the table. "I think you'll find we are," I said. "Please read it, both of you." Robert picked up the envelope, his brow furrowed with annoyance. He tore it open and began to read. Susan leaned over to read along with him. I watched their faces, my own a careful mask of neutrality. As Robert's eyes scanned the first page, his smug expression began to crumble. The color drained from his face. His gaze flickered back and forth between the letter and me, his arrogance replaced by a dawning look of horror. Susan gasped, putting a hand to her mouth. She understood immediately. I could see her looking at her husband in a new light, seeing not a savvy protector of the family's wealth, but a criminal who had risked everything, including their own reputation. The letter detailed the mortgage fraud in cold, legal language. It cited the exact statutes he had violated. It mentioned the evidence we had, the gift letter from the bank's files, the proof of payment to the colluding attorney. When Robert finished reading, he slowly lowered the letter to the table. He was speechless. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The bully, stripped of his power, was nothing more than a scared old man. "You wouldn't," he finally whispered, his voice raspy. He was looking at David. "You're my son. You wouldn't do this to your own father." David leaned forward, speaking for the first time. His voice was quiet but carried the weight of his pain and resolve. "You did this to yourself, Dad," he said. "You lied to us. You tried to trap us. You made our dream into a weapon to control us. This isn't about money anymore. This is about our life. Megan and I are a family, and you tried to break that. So yes, we will do this, unless you agree to every single one of our terms." Susan started to cry softly. "Robert, please," she pleaded with him. "Just sign the papers. Fix this. I told you this was wrong." Robert ignored her, his eyes locked on me. He saw me now, not as the quiet daughter-in-law, but as the person who had orchestrated his defeat. There was a grudging respect mixed with pure hatred in his gaze. "You have 48 hours to have your lawyer contact ours," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. "Her contact information is in the letter. You will sign the quitclaim deed, you will pay our legal fees, and you will give us the space we've demanded. If we don't hear from your lawyer by Monday at 5 p.m., Jessica is instructed to forward her entire file to the U.S. Attorney's Office and the State Bar Association to report the closing lawyer." I stood up and David stood with me. We hadn't ordered any food, we hadn't touched our water. Our purpose was accomplished. "Enjoy your dinner," I said, looking down at the man who had caused us so much pain. We turned and walked out of the restaurant, not looking back. The air outside felt crisp and clean. As we walked to the car, David reached over and took my hand. His was steady. We had faced the monster together and won. We didn't know if he would comply, but for the first time, it didn't matter. We had taken our power back. We were no longer living in his trap. We had found the flaw in his design and placed the demolition charges. All we had to do now was wait for the explosion, or the quiet, unconditional surrender. The 48 hours that followed our dinner ultimatum were the longest of my life. We tried to distract ourselves, working on the garden and watching movies, but the tension was a constant, humming presence in the background. Every phone ring made us jump. Robert didn't call. Monday came, and the hours ticked by with agonizing slowness. I was on a work call at 4:15 p.m. when an email popped up on my screen. The sender was Jessica. The subject line was simple: "He caved." I quickly ended my call and clicked open the email. Jessica wrote that an attorney representing Robert and Susan had contacted her at 4:00 p.m. They had reviewed our letter, and after advising his clients of their significant legal exposure, they had agreed to all of our terms without condition. The lawyer was already drafting the quitclaim deed and was requesting our wiring information to cover Jessica's invoice. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding for days, maybe months. Tears of relief streamed down my face. I called out to David, who was in the other room. He ran in, his face etched with worry. "They agreed," I cried, turning the laptop screen toward him. "It's over. He agreed to everything." He read the email, and the tension visibly melted from his shoulders. He wrapped me in a huge hug, burying his face in my hair. We just stood there in the middle of our office, holding each other, the weight of the last few months finally lifting. Our house was finally, truly ours. The process of untangling ourselves from Robert and Susan was swift and impersonal, conducted entirely through our lawyers. A week later, we met Jess. Ika at the office of a neutral attorney she had selected. The quitclaim deed was ready. Robert and Susan were not there, they had pre-signed the document. Their cowardly absence spoke volumes. As David and I signed the acceptance of the deed, I felt a profound sense of victory. My signature, which had once been an act of naive trust, was now an act of reclamation. We were erasing their names, their control, their poison from our lives. Jessica handed us a copy of the check Robert's lawyer had couriered over, covering her fees to the penny. That night, David and I opened a bottle of champagne we had been saving. We sat on our screened-in porch, looking out at the big oak tree in our front yard. The evening was quiet, and the house felt peaceful for the first time since we'd moved in. It no longer felt like a prison or a trap. It felt like a sanctuary, our sanctuary. "I'm sorry, Megan," David said quietly, swirling the champagne in his glass. "I'm sorry for not listening to your instincts. I'm sorry I let him do this to us." I reached across the small table and took his hand. "We did this together, David. We fixed it together. That's what matters. You stood up to him when it counted and you chose us. That's all I ever needed." He squeezed my hand, his eyes shining with gratitude. "He'll never be in this house again," he said, a vow in his voice. "Neither of them will." We honored the no-contact period, and to our surprise, so did they. The year passed in quiet, blissful freedom. We hosted parties for our friends, we planted a vegetable garden in the backyard, and we made the house completely our own, free from the shadows of unwanted opinions and insidious control. David's relationship with his parents was shattered, perhaps irreparably. He spoke to his mother on occasion, short, strained phone calls on birthdays and holidays, but he did not speak to his father at all. The wound was too deep, the betrayal too fundamental. A few months after the year was up, we received a card in the mail from Susan. It was a generic birthday card for David. Inside, she had written a short, tear-blotted note. She said she was sorry for everything and that Robert was a difficult man who had made a terrible mistake. She hoped one day David could find it in his heart to forgive them. David read the note and put it aside without comment. Forgiveness was a complex thing, and it wasn't something Robert had earned. We had won our freedom not through his remorse, but because we had backed him into a corner from which he had no escape. Our home is our fortress now, built on a foundation not of a fraudulent gift, but of our own resilience and partnership. The deed, with only our two names on it, is framed and hangs in my office. It's a reminder not of the battle we had to fight, but of the strength we found in ourselves and in each other. Robert thought he could buy our lives and own our future, but he grossly underestimated the quiet daughter-in-law who understood that the most important structures are not built with money and deceit, but with trust, respect, and an unbreakable will to protect one's home. And that's a blueprint he could never design.